Hello, and welcome to Night Drive Stories. My name's Jack, and I drive the silent highways of the Pacific Northwest long after midnight, picking up those who wander these misty roads. Tonight, let me tell you the story I heard from the stranger I picked up just outside the old truck stop at mile marker 99. But before, if you like these eerie stories about the lost wanderers I meet along the way, remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I saw him standing in the desolate wash of a single street lamp, a lone figure in the vast empty dark of the high desert. He wasn't hitching, just standing there, looking up at the star-dusted sky with a kind of desperate intensity, as if he were trying to read something in the constellations. He was wiry and agitated, his eyes constantly scanning, not the road, but the world around him, like he was checking it for flaws. When he got into the truck, he brought the scent of cheap coffee and the electric ozone smell that comes after a lightning strike. He was clutching a thick, beat-up manila envelope to his chest as if it contained his own soul. He didn't care where I was going, only that I was moving. The faster the better, he'd said, his voice raspy with disuse. For the first 50 miles, the silence in the cab was absolute, broken only by the low drone of my engine. He kept his gaze fixed out the window, but I got the feeling he wasn't looking at the sagebrush and the looming mesas. He was watching the very texture of the night, searching for something I couldn't see. You ever get the feeling that things aren't screwed down quite right? He asked suddenly, his voice startling me. I glanced over. His face was pale in the green glow of the dashboard. Can't say I have, I replied. He gave a dry, humorless laugh. I used to be like that. I used to think the world was solid. Bedrock. Now I know it's just a broadcast, and someone is trying to change the station. It's the solid things that get you, he began, his fingers tracing the rim of the passenger side window as if to confirm it was still there. You can handle the whispers, the feelings. You can write those off as paranoia, a mind playing tricks on itself after too many days on the road. But when you see a mountain change its shape, when you see a highway sign forget its own name, that's when you know you're not the one who's crazy. The world is. My life on the road is governed by a set of frantic, self-imposed rules. Never stay in the same place for more than 2 nights. Never look too long at any single repeating pattern. Avoid silence, because in the quiet, the signal in my head gets louder. I live on a diet of gas station coffee and a constant low-grade terror that feels like having a live wire pressed against the back of my neck. The motion, the constant forward momentum, it seems to keep the signal from getting a clean lock. It's like I'm trying to outrun a radio wave, hoping that my velocity will cause enough Doppler shift to keep reality from resolving into its true, nightmarish form. The physical sensations are the worst part of the prelude. Before an overwrite, the tinnitus that's my constant companion changes pitch, becoming a sharp, whining hum that makes my teeth ache. I get a metallic taste in my mouth like I'm sucking on a battery. And there's a pressure, a building tension in the air around me, as if the local atmosphere is resisting the change, fighting a battle I am cursed to witness from the front row. It's the universe's immune system trying to fight off an infection that I am carrying. I've been on the road for 6 months now, living out of a duffel bag, never staying in one place for more than a couple of nights. The rule is to keep moving. The motion, the constant forward momentum, it seems to keep the signal from getting a clean lock. The world stays more or less stable when I'm doing 70 down an interstate. It's when I stop, when I settle, that the broadcast starts to come in clear, and the overwrites begin. 2 nights ago, I was driving through northern Arizona, a stretch of highway so empty it feels like you're on the surface of the moon. I was tired, my eyes gritty from staring at the hypnotic white lines. I needed to pull off, find a cheap motel, get a few hours of sleep. Up ahead, I saw the familiar green sign, lit by the high beams of my truck. Canyon Creek, 5 miles. I knew the town. I'd passed through it before. It had a diner with decent coffee and a sleepy little motel run by a woman with a lazy eye. It was a fixed point, a piece of the solid world. I blinked, just a normal, tired blink. But when my eyes opened, the sign was different. It wasn't that the letters had changed. The entire concept of the sign had been rewritten. For a split second that stretched into a cold, terrible eternity, the familiar green rectangle was gone. In its place hung a shape of impossible geometry, a flat plane that seemed to have more than 4 sides, its color a deep, vibrant purple that seemed to drink the light from my headlights. The letters, which had been in that standard blocky highway font, were now a flowing alien script of interconnected spirals and jagged, crystalline shapes. It wasn't a language meant for a human throat. It felt ancient, hungry. The post holding the sign up was no longer steel, but a dark, chitinous-looking material that seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. I yelled, a strangled, involuntary sound of pure shock, and slammed on the brakes. The car swerved, tires screeching on the empty asphalt. And just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. I blinked again, my heart hammering against my ribs, and there it was, back to normal. A simple green sign. Canyon Creek 5 miles. The world had snapped back into place. But I had seen the glitch. I had seen the code underneath the reality we all agree on. That's what I call them. The overwrites. The bleed-throughs. Moments where the broadcast I'm tuned to gets strong enough to superimpose its world over ours. It started with small things. A floral pattern on a cheap motel curtain rearranging itself into a fractal spiral when I wasn't looking. The text on a newspaper blurring into that same alien script for a microsecond. But they're getting stronger, more visceral, more stable. Last week, for a full 30 seconds, I watched a flock of pigeons transmute mid-flight into a swarm of crystalline, bat-like creatures that sliced through the air with an audible hum before they flickered back into birds. So I keep moving. I drive until I can't keep my eyes open, then I sleep for a few hours in the car at a rest stop, and then I drive again. I'm running from this signal, this broadcast that's leaking into the world through me. But I'm not just running from it. I'm running from them. The people who tuned me to this station in the first place. The people at Project Nightingale. It all started with money, he said, a bitter edge to his voice. Doesn't it always? My life had hit a wall. I was a radio operator in the Navy for 8 years, specialized in long-range communications. It's a skill set that, it turns out, doesn't translate well to civilian life. I was bouncing between dead-end jobs, drowning in medical debt from my mother's last year. The collection calls were relentless. I was selling my blood plasma twice a week just to keep the lights on. I was at the absolute end of my rope, the kind of place where your pride is a luxury you can no longer afford, and your desperation becomes a beacon for predators. That beacon was a flyer tacked to a bulletin board at a VA outreach center. It was printed on plain, government-issue cardstock. No fancy logos, no embellishments. Participants needed for advanced communication study, it read. Applicants must have prior experience with SIGINT or long-range radio operation, top-tier compensation, short-term contract, absolute discretion required. There was a P.O. box address, nothing else. The anonymity of it should have been the first giant red flag, a warning that this wasn't some university study. It was a ghost, a whisper, promising salvation in a P.O. box. It screamed off the books, but top-tier compensation screamed louder. I sent in my resume, a history of my life boiled down to frequencies and security clearances. I didn't expect to hear back. A week later, a plain manila envelope arrived at my apartment. No return address. Inside was a single bus ticket to a dusty, forgotten town in the middle of the Nevada desert and a sheet of paper with instructions. Be at a specific diner at 800 hours. Come alone. Bring nothing but a change of clothes. The journey itself felt like a detachment from the world, watching the familiar cities give way to the vast, featureless expanse of the desert. It felt like I was purposefully being taken somewhere that reality had worn thin. The man who met me was named Thompson. He was aggressively bland, the kind of man you'd forget the moment he left the room. Gray suit, gray tie, gray personality. He interviewed me over a plate of greasy eggs, but his questions were strange. He wasn't interested in my technical skills. He asked about my family history of mental illness. He asked if I had ever experienced auditory hallucinations, if I had vivid dreams, if I had ever felt a sense of cosmic loneliness. He wanted to know if I was a resilient and isolated consciousness, a stable receiver. The final question was the weirdest. He slid a piece of paper across the table. On it were a dozen complex abstract patterns like Rorschach tests designed by a circuit board. "Which of these feels the most correct to you?" he asked. I pointed to one, a complex lattice of interlocking hexagons. He just nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in his gray eyes, and said, "The job is yours." He drove me out of town in a black government-issue sedan with tinted windows. We drove for over an hour into the desert, the paved road giving way to a dirt track that wasn't on any map. We finally arrived at the station. That's all they ever called it. It wasn't a military base. There were no fences, no armed guards, no watchtowers. It was just a collection of low, windowless, sand-colored buildings arranged in a precise, almost meditative pattern in the middle of an endless expanse of scrubland. It looked more like a modern art museum or a silent monastery than a secret government facility. The silence there was the first thing that struck me. It was absolute. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of the wind. It was a dead, sterile quiet that felt carefully maintained. Inside, the strangeness continued. The handful of staff members, scientists and technicians, glided through the pristine white hallways with a kind of reverent calm. They all wore simple gray jumpsuits. They spoke in low whispers, if they spoke at all. The entire facility was built with non-Euclidean geometry in mind. Corridors curved at impossible angles, and rooms seemed to shift in size depending on how you looked at them. It was architecture designed to unmoor you from your spatial assumptions. The air had a clean, filtered smell, like a hospital, but underneath it was the faint, sharp tang of ozone. It was a place designed to erase all external stimuli, to make your own mind the only landscape left to explore. My handler, the lead scientist, was a woman named Dr. Evelyn Albright. She was tall, severe, with eyes that seemed to look right through you. She radiated an unnerving aura of absolute certainty, the kind of unwavering conviction that fanatics have. When she shook my hand, her grip was cold, her expression one of intense, almost fanatical focus. "Welcome to Project Nightingale, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice a clinical, emotionless hum. "You are here to help us listen to the sound of creation." My role in Project Nightingale was, on the surface, deceptively simple, Ben continued, his eyes focused on the dark road ahead, as if he could still see the pristine white hallways of the station. My entire world for the next 2 weeks was a single room. It was small, featureless, and completely soundproof, a padded cell for the modern age. There was a comfortable chair, a small desk, and a blank wall. That was it. There were no windows, and the light came from soft, indirect panels in the ceiling that provided a constant, shadowless illumination. It was a space designed to erase the outside world, to turn your focus completely inward. The room wasn't just soundproof, it felt like it was insulated from reality itself. The silence was so profound that I could hear the blood pumping in my own ears, my own heartbeat a frantic drum against the void. It was a sensory deprivation chamber designed not just to isolate me from sound, but to make me desperate for any kind of input, to prime my brain to latch onto the only signal that would be provided. They were starving my senses to make me a more willing vessel. Twice a day, one of the silent technicians would lead me to the room. I would sit in the chair, and they would fit me with the apparatus. It was a heavy, complex set of headphones, but they didn't just cover my ears. It was more like a helmet, with electrodes that they would gently attach to my temples and the back of my skull. The electrodes were cold against my skin, and they were coated in a conductive gel that had a faint, chemical smell. The whole process was impersonal and clinical, like I was a machine being prepped for operation. It was connected by a thick cable to a slot in the wall. The technician would check the connections, nod once, and then leave, the heavy door sealing with a soft hiss that was the only sound I'd hear for the next 4 hours. Once the door was closed, the broadcast would begin, and the wall in front of me, which had been blank, would come to life. It became a screen, but it didn't show images. It showed static, a swirling, chaotic, monochrome sea of it, like an old television tuned to a dead channel. And through the headphones, I would hear the signal, the Nightingale signal. It wasn't a sound in any conventional sense. It was a stream of impossibly complex information that my brain struggled to process. There were no words, no music. It was a layered symphony of clicks, like a swarm of microscopic insects. There were low, resonant hums that seemed to vibrate in my bones, and high-pitched whispers that felt like they were slipping in through the cracks in my thoughts. It was a language made of pure texture and pattern. The signal had a physical effect. The low frequencies made my teeth ache and my vision swim, while the high frequencies felt like spiders crawling on my skin. It was a full-body assault. My job was to listen, or perceive, really, and transcribe. On the desk was a digital tablet and a stylus. As the static swirled on the wall, coherent patterns would occasionally emerge from the chaos. They would resolve for a few seconds, and my job was to draw them on the tablet before they dissolved back into noise. The patterns were alien. They were intricate geometric forms, like the one Thompson had shown me in the diner, but infinitely more complex. They were lattices, spirals, branching fractals. They looked like circuit diagrams for a nervous system, or blueprints for a cathedral built by insects. They had a strange resonant beauty to them that was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. Sometimes the patterns seemed to have a depth that defied the two-dimensional screen, hinting at extra spatial dimensions that made my head spin. Dr. Albright was obsessed. She would review my transcriptions after every session, her cold eyes scanning the patterns I had drawn with a frightening intensity. She wasn't looking at them as data. She was reading them. She would point to a specific spiral and say, "This glyph is a state of being, a form of existence. Can you feel its resonance, Mr. Thorne?" She would push me to let go of my terrestrial assumptions and embrace the signal's logic. She was a high priestess initiating me into the mysteries of her alien god. I spent 80 hours in that chair, in that white room, bathing my brain in that alien signal. The longer I listened, the more the signal seemed to change me. The patterns in the static became clearer, more frequent. The humming and clicking in my headphones started to form a strange, non-auditory language inside my head. I began to have dreams in that language, vast, silent landscapes of impossible geometry and crystalline cities under a black sun. The line between the session and my own consciousness began to dissolve. I didn't know it then, but my mind wasn't just a receiver. It was becoming a repeater station. They weren't just teaching me the language of the Nightingale. They were rewriting my brain to broadcast it. "After 14 days, my contract was up," he said, rubbing his temples as if a headache were coming on. The silent technician led me from the soundproof room for the last time. Dr. Albright was waiting for me. She had my transcriptions, a thick stack of digital printouts covered in those alien geometric patterns. Her face, for the first time, held something other than cold focus. It was a look of triumphant, almost ecstatic satisfaction. It was the look of a scientist whose most radical, insane hypothesis had just been proven correct. "Your contribution to Project Nightingale has been invaluable, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice still a clinical monotone, but with an underlying hum of excitement. "You have a remarkable aptitude for the signal, a true clarity of perception." She handed me a thick envelope stuffed with cash. $10,000, more money than I'd seen in one place in my life. She also handed me a standard-issue government non-disclosure agreement, a document threatening me with every form of legal damnation imaginable if I ever spoke a word about the station or my work there. When I took the pen to sign, I noticed my own hand was trembling slightly, a fine tremor that hadn't been there 2 weeks before. I signed it without a second thought. I just wanted out. The 80 hours of sensory bombardment had left me feeling strange, disconnected, like my brain had been taken apart and put back together with a few extra unnerving pieces. The most immediate side effect was a powerful, unrelenting case of tinnitus. A constant high-pitched hum in my ears that sounded disturbingly like the carrier frequency of the Nightingale signal. Dr. Albright assured me it was a common side effect of the deep-range audio equipment and would fade in a few days. She smiled when she said it, a thin, bloodless expression that didn't reach her eyes. It was the smile of someone telling a necessary and convenient lie. The same bland government man, Thompson, drove me back to the bus station in that dusty Nevada town. The journey was silent. As I stepped out of the car, the ordinary sounds of the world, the rumble of a passing truck, the chatter of people, felt alien and jarring, a chaotic noise compared to the clean architectural structure of the signal. When he dropped me off, he gave me one last, lingering look. "Remember your obligation of discretion, Mr. Thorne," he said. "Some signals are best left unbroadcast." It was the first time he'd said anything that sounded remotely like a warning. The tinnitus didn't fade. If anything, it got more complex. It wasn't just a simple hum anymore. In the quiet of my first night in a cheap motel room, I could hear the clicks and whispers woven into it, a faint but constant echo of the signal. It was a ghost of the broadcast, permanently burned into my auditory cortex. Lying in the dark, I could almost see the patterns swirling behind my closed eyelids, my own mind a screen for the static. It was no longer something I was listening to. It was a part of me now. But then the overwrites started. They were small at first, so small I could almost convince myself I was imagining them. I was staring at the god-awful floral pattern on the motel room's bedspread, and for a split second, the repeating roses and vines seemed to shimmer, their organic shapes resolving into a familiar, rigid hexagonal lattice before snapping back to normal. I shook my head, blaming exhaustion. Later, I was reading a newspaper in a diner, and the block of text I was looking at suddenly blurred, the English alphabet momentarily replaced by the jagged, spiraling script I had spent 2 weeks transcribing. I dropped the paper, my heart pounding. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't pick up my coffee cup. The waitress asked if I was all right, and the sound of her voice seemed distant and strange, filtered through the constant hum in my head. I started seeing the patterns everywhere, not in a hallucinatory way, but as a subtle underlying structure to the world. They were in the wood grain of the diner's table, a faint geometric ghost beneath the varnish. They were in the formation of clouds in the sky, in the branching patterns of frost on a window pane. It was like I had been given a new form of vision, the ability to see the source code beneath the user interface of reality. And the source code was the Nightingale signal. It was a terrifying, secret knowledge. I was seeing the scaffolding of creation, and I knew with dawning horror that it was being dismantled and replaced with something else. The real terror began when things started to change when I wasn't looking. I bought a cheap watch at a pawn shop. It was a simple analog watch with a plain white face. I left it on the nightstand while I slept. When I woke up, the numbers were gone. In their place were 12 unique, intricate glyphs from the alien language, and the second hand was no longer sweeping, but ticking forward in a jagged, stuttering rhythm that matched the clicking patterns of the signal. The watch was no longer telling my time. It was telling its time. I threw the watch against the wall, smashing it to pieces. I packed my bag and left that town, thinking I could leave the strangeness behind. I didn't understand yet. The strangeness wasn't in the town or the watch. It was in me. I was the source of the broadcast. I spent the next 2 months in a state of escalating panic, moving from one anonymous town to the next, Ben said, his voice dropping low. I thought I could outrun it. I thought that if I changed my environment, the phenomenon would stop. But it only got worse. The overwrites grew more frequent, more profound. One night, I was watching television in a motel room, and the face of a news anchor suddenly flickered, her features momentarily replaced by a smooth, porcelain-like mask with no mouth and 3 black, almond-shaped eyes. The audio didn't change. Her voice kept droning on about stock prices, but for 5 solid seconds, I was watching an alien deliver the evening news. I knew I was going insane or that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with the world. I needed to find someone else from the study. There were 4 of us in my group. We were kept separate, never allowed to interact, but I had caught glimpses of the others in the hallways of the station. One man in particular, I remembered his name from a slip-up by a technician. Harris. I didn't know his first name, but I knew he was ex-Air Force, and I knew he was from Phoenix. It was a long shot, a desperate stab in the dark, but I was out of options. I spent weeks cross-referencing public records, searching for military veterans named Harris in the Phoenix area who fit his rough age profile. I finally found him, an address in a rundown suburban neighborhood. I drove there, my stomach churning with a mixture of hope and dread. I didn't know what I would find, but anything was better than being alone with this. The closer I got to his address, the stronger the humming in my head became, a clear sign that I was approaching another source, Another broadcaster. The house was wrong. From the outside, it looked normal, if a little neglected. But every window was covered from the inside with thick sheets of aluminum foil, glinting dully in the Arizona sun. I knocked on the door. For a long time, there was no answer. Then, a voice from inside, muffled and trembling. "Go away!" "Harris?" I called out, my voice shaky. "My name is Ben Thorne. We were at the station together. Project Nightingale." The chain on the door rattled. It opened a crack, and a single terrified eye peered out at me. It was him, but he looked like he had aged 20 years. His face was gaunt, his skin had a waxy pallor, and his eyes were wide with a terror that I recognized intimately. He saw me, and a flicker of recognition, and then horror, crossed his face. He slammed the door shut. I heard him scrambling to lock it. I hammered on the door, yelling his name, telling him I was experiencing it too. The tinnitus, the patterns, the changes. Finally, he opened the door again and pulled me inside, quickly locking it behind me. The inside of his house was a madman's fortress. Every single surface, the walls, the ceiling, the floor, was covered in layers of heavy-duty aluminum foil. The air was hot and suffocating and smelled of stale food and fear. "The foil helps," he whispered, his eyes darting around the room. "It dampens the signal, makes the overwrites less stable." He confirmed my worst fears and then made them infinitely worse. "You still think we were just listening, don't you?" he said with a ragged, hysterical laugh. "That was the cover story, the lie they told us to keep us compliant. This isn't a listening project, Thorne. It's an imprinting project. The Nightingale signal. It's not from a probe. It's a bleed-through. A signal leaking from another dimension, another reality. And they didn't just want us to hear it. They wanted it to hear us. They tuned our minds, our very consciousness, into receivers for this thing. And now we're not just receivers anymore. We're transmitters." He grabbed a framed photo from a table. "My family," he said, his voice cracking. "My wife, my 2 daughters." He shoved it in my face. The frame was normal, but the photograph inside had been completely overwritten. Where a smiling family should have been, there was now a snapshot of a truly alien landscape. A blood-red sky hung over a city of spiraling crystalline towers that pulsed with a cold, blue light. The ground was a carpet of what looked like pulsating fungal growths, and strange multi-limbed creatures skittered through the streets. "It started with their faces," Harris sobbed, collapsing onto a foil-covered couch. "A little flicker here and there. Then their clothes. Then last week I woke up and this is all that was left. It's rewriting our world, Thorne. It's using us as the antennas, and it's painting its reality right over ours. And the longer we stay in one place, the stronger the signal gets." He looked up at me, his eyes full of a terrible, dawning realization. "You have to get out of here," he whispered. "You've been here too long. You're broadcasting, and you're making my signal stronger." He started screaming at me to leave, and as he did, I saw the foil on the wall behind him start to ripple, the metallic surface momentarily resolving into a pattern of interlocking hexagons before snapping back. We were amplifying each other. I fled his house of foil, the knowledge of what I had become a cold, heavy stone in my gut. "Harris's revelation changed everything," he said, his voice a dead monotone now, as if recounting the details of his own autopsy. "I wasn't just a haunted man anymore. I was a plague vector, a walking, talking dimensional tear. My entire existence became a frantic, desperate attempt to stay out of phase with the signal, to keep moving fast enough that the overwrites couldn't get a solid lock on reality. I became a ghost on the highways, a blur in the landscape, because I knew that if I stopped for too long, the world around me would start to fray at the edges." Before I fled his house in his panic, Harris had shoved a thick manila envelope into my hands, the one I'm holding now. "I copied it from Albright's office," he'd hissed. "Everything. The real project proposals, the progress notes. You need to know what they really wanted." I didn't read it for weeks. I was too scared. I just drove, fueled by caffeine and pure terror, watching the world in my rearview mirror, terrified I'd see a road sign for Phoenix glitch into that alien script. The envelope sat on my passenger seat, A toxic presence, a Pandora's box I lacked the courage to open. Finally, in a cheap motel in Utah, I found the courage to open it. The documents inside were dense with scientific jargon and redacted paragraphs, but the truth was there, hidden in the clinical, passionless language. Project Nightingale was never about communication. It was about transformation. The scientists, led by Albright, believed the signal was the source code for a superior, more stable reality. They saw our universe as chaotic, random, and flawed. They saw the Nightingale's reality as ordered, perfect, and eternal. They weren't scientists. They were acolytes. They were trying to invite a new god into our world, and we were the sacrificial lambs meant to open the door. The documents detailed the overwrites with a chilling detachment. They called them reality mapping events. They had monitored all of us after we were released, secretly documenting the escalating glitches in our lives. My motel curtains, Harris's family photo, it was all there, recorded as data points in their insane experiment. They knew exactly what was happening to us. They were studying it. They were refining it. They had charts and graphs, tracking the efficacy of each broadcaster. I wasn't a person in those pages. I was subject delta. But the final pages contained the true horror, the unspoken variable. It was a memo from Albright to her superiors, outlining the theoretical Phase 3 of the project. Phase 1 was imprinting the signal onto a host. Phase 2 was observing the host's ability to overwrite inanimate objects in local environments. But Phase 3 was the real goal. The memo was titled, Intersubjective Signal Transference. Albright theorized that a sufficiently powerful broadcaster, one who had been exposed for long enough, or who was just naturally more receptive, could do more than just change objects. She believed they could begin to overwrite the consciousness of other people. She wrote that prolonged proximity to a broadcaster could cause a subject's own mind to become attuned to the Nightingale signal, making them able to perceive the overwrites themselves, and eventually, to become broadcasters in their own right. The project wasn't just about creating a doorway. It was about creating a chain reaction. It was a weapon, a way to convert an entire population, to tune them all to the same single alien station. That's the fear I live with now, every second of every day. It's not just about the world changing around me anymore. It's about the people. Every person I interact with, every cashier I speak to, every life I brush up against, is a potential victim. How long does it take? A 10-minute conversation? An hour in the same room? I don't know. The documents were theoretical. But sometimes when I'm paying for gas, I see a flicker of something in the attendant's eyes. A momentary confusion, a tilt of the head, as if they're hearing a faint high-pitched noise they can't identify. And I wonder, did I just give it to them? Did I just plant a seed of that signal in their mind? That's why I have to keep moving. It's not just about saving my own sanity anymore. It's about trying to protect everyone else from me. I am a contagion, and I have no idea how far my signal reaches. He fell silent. His story finished, leaving a chilling void in the dark cab. He slumped back in his seat, clutching the manila envelope, a man condemned by a knowledge he should never have possessed. We drove on for another 20 minutes without a word. Then he suddenly sat bolt upright, his eyes wide with a fresh wave of panic. "Stop the truck," he whispered, his voice tight. "What is it?" I asked, my own heart starting to pound. "Just stop the truck. Now." I pulled over to the gravel shoulder, the engine idling. He didn't look at me. He was staring intently at my dashboard, at the small digital clock. The red numbers glowed. 3:33 a.m. "What's wrong with the clock?" I asked. He looked up at me, his face a mask of pure terror. "It's not the clock," he said, his voice a choked gasp. "It's you. Your question. You asked, what's wrong with the clock? The same way I would. You can see it too, can't you?" I looked back at the clock. The numbers were clear. 3:33 a.m. But as I stared for a fraction of a second, the colon between the hour and the minutes flickered, and in its place was a single black almond-shaped eye. He didn't wait for my answer. He fumbled with the door handle, threw himself out of the truck, and ran, stumbling into the impenetrable darkness of the desert night, leaving me alone on the side of the highway, the echo of his terror, my new companion. I was left staring at my dashboard, where a small red number 3 had begun to spiral into a familiar hexagonal pattern.